is something we all need right now, especially always, really. I mean, I think hope is what brings us to the social work profession and helping professions to begin with. But it can be really hard to maintain when we look at the outside world and things seem and feel so bleak. And, you know, maybe that's criminal justice, maybe that's the political systems, maybe that's other stuff. You know, there's a lot of things we can look to right now as a society, and feel pretty hopeless about. Nature is constant. Like, trees can be hundreds of years old. Even if the tree itself is not hundreds of years old, like the species of the tree is. Nature is the constant that outlasts everything else. You know, the social constructions we build as a society, the institutions we build as a society, the social norms we develop as a society, all of these things are very temporary. You know, what is considered best practice today is not what was considered best practice, you know, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The societal aspect of it, the stuff that humans create, changes and shifts and ebbs and flows and has highs and lows over time. Nature is really a constant. And when I am struggling to find a reason to hope, when I am struggling to find a reason to understand why things are happening the way they are, nature is where I turn to. And that can be just, you know, physically being in nature, such as this sort of beautiful landscape behind me. Just being in nature is physically healing to us as humans. Also looking at things from a nature-based standpoint. Recently you watched a video on unpacking modern day social problems down to the roots. That's using nature as a template to understand things. When we look at how nature operates, very often, I mean, we humans are part of nature too, so very often there are parallels between how the natural world exists and how ideally humans could potentially exist. We can use trees, for example, or the way that plants grow, the way that the natural rhythms of life play out. We can use that as a framework for understanding social problems to give us a little bit more context. So in this video, I want to do the same thing applied to criminal justice, and I want to have a little story time. So this is one of the books that I am taking a look at these days. It's one of the books the folks here who we're doing some work with lent me to learn a little bit more about nature and the natural world, and that's a big part of my mission in being here, is to continue to explore and see those parallels between, you know, social justice, the social work profession, etc., and the natural world and the lessons we might learn. So this book is called Grass, Soil, and Hope. In a very quick nutshell, it's basically about how to solve global warming by taking care of soil, because soil stores carbon dioxide. When soil is cared for well, it stores carbon dioxide, which prevents it from, you know, expelling out into the atmosphere, creating global warming. So it's essentially a pathway into learning how to, you know, save the world from global warming. But there was specifically, in the first few pages, there were specifically some snippets that really resonated to me as I was thinking about our criminal justice system and how do we start to get a lens of hope. How do we start to envision something beyond what we have right now, which hopefully at this point you're recognizing there's some pretty big things that aren't working. How do we move beyond what's not working and start to visualize into something that could work, rather than, you know, tweaking different pieces, trying to change individual tiny little policies, and kind of spinning our wheels within a system itself that is just not built to do what it's meant to do. How do we start to detach from that into a new vision, into understanding what are we doing wrong overall and what could we do differently instead? So I want to read you just a few little excerpts from this book and talk about how I see them relating to the criminal justice system. How does soil and hope relate to criminal justice? Okay, so the book starts with, this is a story about carbon and hope. It begins in the gentle rolling hills surrounding the tiny town of Nicasio in Marin County, California. So essentially, John and his wife Peggy were environmentalists. They decided to move into ranching, basically owning land, caring for land, owning property, tending to the soil, essentially. So when they first moved here, they had this assumption that in order to be an environmentalist, that livestock were incompatible. So maybe you've heard, you know, a conversation about livestock being a producer of carbon dioxide, which contributes to global warming. So when they first moved to this area, they subscribed to the conventional zero-sum paradigm of the movement, that conservation, environmental conservation, could only advance as far as the cattle retreated. So they bought this ranch. The first thing they did was to kick all the cows off that land. So they had a neighbor who was grazing his cattle on the land they ended up buying. They had this paradigm that said cattle are bad for the environment. They kicked the cattle out. As John tells the story, once the cows departed, their ranch quickly turned into a weedy mess with all sorts of exotic and noxious plants popping up all over, threatening the very ecosystem John and Peggy were determined to protect. In response, they turned to the standard remedies: pulling, spraying, mowing, and burning the weeds with a vengeance. But none of it made a difference. The objectionable plants came back, stronger than ever. In something like desperation, John turned to an acquaintance, Jeffrey Creek, an agroecologist who was part of the management team at a nearby organic olive farm. Visiting the ranch, Jeff gently told John and Peggy that the weeds were a symptom of their land's poor health, not the cause. He urged them to think holistically. Pulling, mowing, burning, and especially spraying, he told them, were activities that suppressed life. Instead, as landowners, they should be encouraging life on the ranch by working with nature and its processes, not against it. How could they encourage the native grasses to grow and proliferate, outcompeting the weeds? Instead of asking, what can I do to kill something, they should have been asking, what can I do to help something flourish? These were two totally different questions with two totally different courses of action. It was all about attitude. This is bigger than weeds of grass, of course. We humans tend to focus on the problem rather than the potential of a particular situation, too often dwelling on the negative rather than exploring the positive. Where John saw trouble on his land, Jeff saw possibility. Where John saw mowing, burning, and spraying as necessary to removing something he didn't like, Jeff saw these activities as an assault on life in general. Jeff pointed out, for example, that spraying herbicide kills a lot more than weeds. It kills the microbial life in the soil too, which is bad because microbes are essential to the health and vigor of all plants. Jeff's advice to John and Peggy was to flip their goals from negative to positive, work on the potential of their land, and manage their ranch for life and health instead of death. Perhaps you're already having some parallels running through your mind as well. Why would I be talking about criminal justice and reading you this excerpt from this book? Well, what is our criminal justice system currently designed to do? Again, I hope you're seeing some of those parallels. Right now we have a criminal justice system that sees a behavior it doesn't like and it tries to eradicate that behavior, right? Just like the weeds, just like John and Peggy initially when they moved onto the land, they targeted those weeds, they tried to pull them, they tried to burn them, they tried to suppress them. They were very much focused on eradicating, on killing the thing they didn't like. And what did that do? It damaged the soil, it caused the weeds to be even stronger. Criminal justice system, let's take a walk here. What happens when somebody commits a crime and they're incarcerated? The intention is to drive out the behavior, right? The intention is to show them the consequences of their action. The intention is to eradicate the behavior that is not desired. What is the actual impact? What happens to humans in that situation, right? We take somebody who's engaging in a negative behavior, we place them in a negative situation, and we expect that to eradicate the negative behavior. Now let's unpack it a level deeper. Why do people engage in negative behaviors? Why do people engage in substance use? Why do people engage in criminal activity? It's not because they're innately bad, right? Like hopefully we as social workers are seeing this, are knowing this, are understanding this. People engaged in substance use because they are looking to escape, they are looking to cope with trauma, they are looking to address issues that have happened in their life. People engage in criminal activity because they're looking to escape poverty, because that's all they've been raised around, that's the only environment they know. We're targeting something that we're trying to kill without understanding why it's happening. So what I would invite us to think about in terms of a criminal justice system is what would it look like to have a criminal justice system that instead of suppressing life, instead of asking ourselves, how do we kill something? How do we kill this bad behavior? What can I do to help something flourish? What do we want to flourish in people? What prevents crime? What prevents substance use? You know, hope. Having hope prevents those things. Having survival needs met prevents those things. Having healthy connections and understandings of emotional processes, knowing how to heal trauma prevents those things. What would it look like to design a criminal justice system that was not fixated on suppressing something, but that was instead fixated on growing the things that we want to grow? And I just ask that as an open question. You know, it's a big adjustment because in this society, we've had the criminal justice system we've had for centuries, since slavery. As we're reading about in the new Jim Crow, it really has become, our criminal justice system has really become the step above. I mean, it was from slavery, Jim Crow, criminal justice system, right? So that's what we're learning about. It's a continuation of activities that has been occurring within this country, not exactly for benevolent reasons since the start of this country. So what would it look like to take that and turn it into something different? Something that was more hopeful, something that actually helped people heal and invoked their goodness, as opposed to assuming that they are negative and assuming that something has to be driven out of them. A healing lens looks at things like isolation from support systems, which is what criminal justice system currently does, solitary confinement, a very common practice in the criminal justice system, this power and control / forced compliance process that happens within criminal justice systems, malnutrition. If you've ever known anybody who has spent any time incarcerated, you know the food they are fed is hardly food. Financial exploitation. I once knew the figures, but the amount of money that it takes for somebody to make a phone call or to be able to purchase food that is not the only malnutrient food that's served to people who are incarcerated, it's astronomical. The financial exploitation of forcing them to work as well. To me, it comes down to this mentality of, do we believe in healing? Do we believe in healing? Do we believe that it is possible to heal the soil? Do we believe that it is possible to heal our world, or is our world just a lost cause? As this book will attest to, healing is possible for the earth itself. If we believe that healing is possible on a human level, that calls us to change the approach that we're taking to the criminal justice system as well. If we believe that healing is possible on a human level, then really the social environment that's necessary in order to foster that kind of healing is one that is much more supportive, much more nurturing, much more understanding, much more compassionate than what we have right now. You know, there are some ways that this conversation is starting to take place within criminal justice circles and more broadly as well. One of the things we'll be learning about this semester is more about trauma. Really, when it comes down to it, if we want to understand the root of all evil in the world, trauma is the root of all evil in the world. We can walk that back to our origin as a country and the trauma that was done when Europeans first came to colonize this land, the trauma that was brought over by the Europeans who were colonizing this land from their own home country, which is why they were trying to escape here. You know, we've had this ongoing cyclical trauma cycle as a human population across the world for a long time, but in this country since it first became the United States of America. So what we're really needing to move towards as a country is this focus on trauma healing. And one of the pioneers in this area is Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, but she, along with many others, are increasing awareness about the need to understand trauma when we're trying to address, you know, those negative human behaviors that we don't want to see. Substance use, criminal behavior, violence, murder, etc. People don't do things for no reason. Hopefully we as social workers, again, are starting to recognize this, or maybe we've already learned this. People don't do things for no reason. If we unpack anybody's history, we can start to understand how they ended up in the circumstance that they are right now. Just like understanding a social problem, we have to move from the branches down to the roots. We have to do that on an individual level as well. And very often, I'm going to say always, what's at the roots is trauma. What's at the roots is trauma. So if we can create a criminal justice system that is built on trauma, we create one that is more hopeful, that is focused on what do we want to instill in the human population, not what do we want to suppress. Okay, So I'm going to call that it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed our little story time. I'm going to try to keep doing these and bring in nature as a teaching tool throughout the semester to, just sort of, try to keep us literally physically grounded. And again, a real important thing for me has been being able to turn to nature as the constant when things feel chaotic, to help us understand why is this happening, why aren't these systems working, and most importantly, to start to ask those questions of ourselves. How do we start to transition into something more human and more humane? All right, take good care. It is rough out there. Reach out if you need to, and we'll talk again. Bye-bye.